Jesus taught us that Satan is the father of the lie. We recall that he deceived Eve, a perfect woman. He lied about our precious Jehovah. Now, you're familiar, many of you, with Revelation chapter 12. I invite you to find that. Revelation chapter 12. And in this chapter, verses 7 and 8 address the fact that the war broke out in heaven. But notice, after they're kicked out of heaven, in verse 9 we read, "So down the great dragon was hurled, the original serpent, the one called Devil and Satan, who is misleading the entire inhabited earth. He was hurled down to the earth, and his angels were hurled down with him." Now, I read it that way specifically, but see, what it doesn't say is, in the middle part of verse 9, Satan, who's trying to mislead the entire inhabited earth. No. He is misleading the entire inhabited earth. That's crucial to understand when we think about the theme of this talk, not to be misled by imitation peace, because as the ruler of the world, that's what he's out to do, is mislead.
Presumably coaxed to the podium with promises of a whiskey popsicle is governing body member Anthony Morris III, who's delivering the concluding talk on the Friday, "Do Not Be Misled by Imitation Peace." Tony, Tight Pants Tony, Anthony Morris, whatever you want to call him, he's all about truth. He's all about keeping it real. And he really doesn't like the way Satan lies.
Jesus taught us that Satan is the father of the lie. We recall that he deceived Eve, a perfect woman. He lied about our precious Jehovah.
Did he, though? Did Satan lie to Eve about Jehovah? If you'd asked me that question when I was a believer, when I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, it would be an emphatic yes, because that's what we were repeatedly told. But what's interesting is when you actually read the verse, there's no lie. So let's bring up Genesis 3, verses 4 and 5, if Tibor is gracious. And as we know, he is gracious. At this, the serpent said to the woman, "You certainly will not die, for God knows that in the very day you eat from it," that's the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, "your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and bad." So Satan, or the serpent, the talking snake, we're keeping it real here, folks. The serpent says to the woman, "You will not die. What's going to happen is you're going to become like God, knowing good and bad." Then what do we read in verses 22 to 24? Jehovah God then said, "Here the man has become like one of us in knowing good and bad," exactly what the serpent said. "Now, in order that he may not put his hand out and take fruit also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." With that, Jehovah God expelled him from the Garden of Eden to cultivate the ground from which he had been taken. So he drove the man out, and he posted at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubs and the flaming blade of a sword that was turning continuously to guard the way to the tree of life. So what I never really got my head around, or what I was confused about as a Jehovah's Witness, and maybe this will apply to one or two Jehovah's Witnesses watching, there were two trees in the Garden of Eden, supposedly. I mean, I don't think any of this happened, but taking it at face value, there was a tree of life And when Adam and Eve ate from it, they lived forever. And there was a tree of the knowledge of good and bad, which would make them like God in knowing good and bad. They were allowed to eat as much as they wanted from the tree of life, which gave them eternal life, but they weren't allowed to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. So when Satan said, "You will not die by eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad," he was telling the truth. Because so long as they were still allowed to eat from the tree of life, they would be living. They would continue living indefinitely. It's just that God, when he saw that they'd eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, expelled them from the Garden of Eden so that they wouldn't have access to the tree of life that was giving them eternal life. So actually, Satan wasn't lying. So right out of the gate, in a talk about not being misled, I feel Tony Morris is misleading his audience, and he's doing so as one of the leaders of an organization that has form for this sort of thing. I've actually done a video, if Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will appear, lying for Jehovah, 4 examples of Watchtower representatives using theocratic warfare. Lying is okay, it turns out, so long as you're doing it for Jehovah, so long as the organization benefits in some way. I explain in the video that it's even in the publications that Jehovah's Witnesses have permission to do this. And then in the same video, I give 4 video examples, so on camera, of Jehovah's Witness representatives, including governing body member Jeffrey Jackson, just telling barefaced lies about the organization and the religion and the theology on camera. So extremely hypocritical for Tony Morris to be bleating about lies and being misleading when he is part of the leadership of an organization that routinely misleads millions of people.